I'm Rosemary Thorne. I'm 76 years old, a woman, and my own brother burned my life's work to the ground because I wouldn't give him half of it. It's a sentence that feels like a lie when I say it, a piece of some lurid television drama, not the truth of my life. But it is my truth. It's the smoke I still smell in my sleep and the scar tissue that covers a place in my heart I thought was untouchable. My heart, you see, was a restaurant called The Hearth. It wasn't just a business. It was a living, breathing thing, a testament to a love that I thought would last forever, and a legacy I built with my own two hands. My husband Thomas and I opened The Hearth in 1978. We were young, full of hopeless optimism, and we had a shared dream. We bought a rundown diner on the edge of town, a place everyone else had written off. It had cracked vinyl booths and a layer of grease on the windows that seemed to have fossilized. But we saw past the grime. We saw the potential for warmth, for community. We spent a year of our lives renovating it ourselves. Thomas, a carpenter by trade, laid the new hardwood floors until his knees were raw and built the sturdy oak tables that would one day hold countless family dinners and first dates. I was in charge of the heart of the place, the kitchen. I spent months perfecting my mother's recipes, turning simple, honest food into something people would remember. We didn't have much money, so every penny we earned from our side jobs went into that building. Our sweat and our savings and our arguments and our laughter are in the very bones of that place, or they were. The Hearth became our second home, and then, after Thomas passed away from a sudden heart attack 10 years ago, it became my only home. It was where I felt him most. I could stand by the pass listening to the sizzle of onions in a pan and the clatter of plates, and I could almost feel his hand on the small of my back, hear his quiet chuckle. The restaurant thrived. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. It was known for its pot roast that melted in your mouth, its flaky apple pies, and its atmosphere of genuine welcome. It was the place you went after a funeral or to celebrate a christening. It was a landmark, a constant. It was mine. And then there was my brother, Vincent. Vincent is 4 years my junior, but in his mind the world has owed him a living since the day he was born. While I was learning to bake and save, Vincent was learning how to wheedle and complain. Our parents, God rest their souls, loved him dearly, but their love often translated into enabling. They saw his failures as bad luck, his laziness as a sensitive, artistic temperament. I saw him for what he was, a black hole of entitlement. I remember one incident so clearly. I was about 19, saving up for a down payment on a small car. I worked 2 jobs, waitressing and cleaning houses. Vincent, who was 15, wanted a new leather jacket he'd seen downtown. He begged our father for it, but Dad for once stood firm and told him to get a job. A week later, my savings box, the one I kept hidden in my closet, was empty. I knew it was him. There was no one else. When I confronted him, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "You have 2 jobs, Rosemary. It's not fair you have so much money and I have nothing." He didn't even deny it. He truly believed he was entitled to my hard-earned money. My parents made him apologize, but they still bought him the jacket a month later for his birthday. The message was clear. Vincent's wants were as important as my work. This pattern repeated itself throughout our lives. When our father passed away, he left his old, reliable sedan to me, knowing I needed it to get to the restaurant at 4 a.m. Vincent, who had a perfectly fine car of his own, threw a tantrum. He claimed Dad had promised it to him, that I had somehow manipulated our father on his deathbed. He made my grief 1,000 times heavier with his accusations. He eventually borrowed the car to run an errand and returned it with a long, deep scratch down the side. "A shopping cart must have hit it," he'd said with a shrug, never offering to pay for the repair. He didn't care about the car, he just couldn't stand the idea of me having something he felt should have been his. As we grew older, his schemes became more ambitious. He fancied himself an entrepreneur, but he lacked the patience and the work ethic for it. He'd get a brilliant idea, selling water purifiers, investing in emu farms, day trading, and he would come to our mother for the seed money. Each venture would fail spectacularly, and he'd retreat to her house, licking his wounds and blaming the economy, his partners, the weather, anything but himself. All the while, I was building the Hearth brick by brick, customer by customer. My success was a constant, glaring spotlight on his failures, and he resented me for it with a passion that curdled the air between us. He rarely visited the restaurant. And when he did, he'd sit at a back table, scowling as if the happy sounds of my patrons were a personal insult. He saw my life's work not as something I had built, but as something I had that he didn't. And in his mind, that was an injustice that needed to be corrected. The day it all started to unravel was a Tuesday in late autumn. The air was crisp, and the golden afternoon light was streaming through the front windows of the hearth, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was the quiet time, that peaceful lull between the lunch rush and the dinner prep. I was sitting at my usual table, table 7, the small two-top tucked into a corner by the window, reconciling the previous day's receipts. The comforting aroma of yeast from the rolls proofing in the kitchen hung in the air, mingled with the scent of lemon polish and brewing coffee. My head chef, Maria, was humming a cheerful tune in the back. It was a perfect, ordinary moment of peace. The bell over the door jingled, a familiar, welcoming sound. But when I looked up, the sight of my brother Vincent standing there made the peaceful atmosphere curdle. He hadn't set foot in the hearth for over a year, not since I'd refused to give him a $2,000 loan for another one of his doomed ventures. He was wearing a threadbare sports coat over a wrinkled shirt, a look he probably thought was distinguished. To me, it just looked tired. His face, which had once been handsome, was now drawn and shadowed with a perpetual grievance. "Rosemary," he said, his voice trying for a casual charm that didn't reach his eyes. "Vincent," I replied, my voice cooler than I intended. I didn't get up. I simply folded my hands over the pile of receipts. "What do you want?" He feigned a wounded look and slid into the chair opposite me without being invited. "Is that any way to greet your brother? Can't I just stop by to see how my big sister is doing?" "The last time you stopped by to see how I was doing, you walked out with my emergency cash from the register," I reminded him flatly. "I learned my lesson." His face tightened, the mask of pleasantry slipped. "That was a misunderstanding. I paid you back." "You paid me back 200 of the 500 you took 6 months later. Let's not rewrite history, Vincent." He waved a dismissive hand as if swatting away an annoying fly. "I'm not here to talk about the past. I'm here to talk about the future, our future." I raised an eyebrow. "Our future? Vincent, you and I don't have a future. We have a shared past, and that's about it." "That's where you're wrong," he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I was visiting Mom yesterday. She's not doing well, Rosie. She gets confused. She was talking about Dad, about the old days, and she said something. She said, 'I always wished the kids could have done something together, a real family business.'" My heart sank. Our mother was in a wonderful nursing home, but her dementia had been progressing steadily. She lived in a fog of memories where my father was still alive and we were still children. Vincent using her confused ramblings for his own gain was a new low, even for him. "Don't you dare use Mom as a pawn in whatever game you're playing," I warned, my voice shaking with anger. "It's not a game," he hissed, his volume rising. A couple of my staff setting tables for dinner service glanced over. "This is about what's right, what Mom and Dad would have wanted. They helped you start this place, didn't they? Dad co-signed that first loan." "Dad co-signed the loan that we paid off in 5 years, I shot back. "Thomas and I worked 80-hour weeks for a decade to make this place what it is. You were off somewhere in Florida trying to sell beachfront property that was actually swampland. You have no claim here." He slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. I am a thorn. This is a thorn legacy. You've had it all to yourself for 40 years, Rosemary. You've gotten rich off of our family name while I've struggled. You struggled? I laughed, a bitter, incredulous sound. I struggled when my husband died and I had to learn how to run this place alone. I struggled through recessions and bad tourist seasons. You haven't struggled, you've just failed. There's a difference. The truth of my words hit him like a physical blow. His face went pale, then a blotchy red. He leaned in so close I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. I'm not asking any more. I'm telling you, I want what's mine. I want 50% of this business. I'll be your partner. We'll run it together. I stared at him, truly speechless for a moment. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. He wanted to walk in after 40 years of contributing nothing but grief and demand half of my soul. Finally, I found my voice. It was quiet but as hard as steel. Get out. What? You heard me. Get out of my restaurant. The answer is N. Oh, not now, not ever. There is no reality on this earth in which you will ever own a single splinter of wood from this floor. Now leave. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His whole body was trembling with rage. His eyes, small and dark, scanned the room, the beautiful room that Thomas and I had built, as if he were memorizing every detail. It wasn't a look of admiration. It was a look of pure, unadulterated poison. You'll regret this, Rosemary, he whispered, his voice venomous. You think you're so high and mighty sitting here in your little kingdom, but kingdoms can burn. And then he turned and walked out. The bell over the door jingled mockingly behind him. I sat there, my hands trembling, a cold dread seeping into my bones. I watched his car peel out of the parking lot, and I knew that he hadn't just made a threat, he had made a promise. The dread Vincent left behind lingered in the air long after he was gone. It clung to me through the dinner service, a cold, greasy film on my skin. Every time the door opened, I flinched, expecting to see his angry face again. I tried to dismiss his final words as the impotent rambling of a bitter man, but I couldn't shake the image of his eyes. That look wasn't just anger, it was a promise of annihilation. I told myself I was being foolish, that he was all talk, a lifetime of empty threats. But something deep inside me, a primal instinct, was screaming a warning. That night I went home and I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, the sheets tangling around my legs like ropes. I kept replaying the conversation in my mind, his sneering voice, the slam of his hand on the table. Around 2 in the morning, I finally drifted into a shallow, uneasy slumber. I dreamt of fire. Not the comforting, contained fire of the hearth's kitchen stoves, but a wild, roaring inferno, orange and black against a night sky. I was jolted awake by the shrill, insistent ringing of the telephone on my nightstand. For a foggy second, I thought it was part of the dream, but it kept ringing, a piercing sound that sliced through the silence of my house. My heart hammered against my ribs as I fumbled for the receiver. It was 2:47 a.m. A phone call at this hour is never good news. Hello, I managed, my voice thick with sleep. Mrs. Thorne, Rosemary Thorne. The voice was male, urgent, and professional. Yes, this is she. Ma'am, this is Captain Miller with the Stafford Township Fire Department. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but there's been a fire at your restaurant. At the hearth, the building is fully engulfed. We need you to stay where you are. We have the area cordoned off. The world stopped. The captain's words seemed to hang in the air, nonsensical and unreal, fully engulfed. The phrase echoed in the silent, empty space in my head. I couldn't process it. My hand holding the phone started to shake so violently I could barely keep my grip. Is anyone hurt? I finally whispered, the only question my shocked mind could form. No, ma'am, the building was empty. We've made sure of that. But the structure, I'm sorry, Mrs. Thorne, it looks like it's going to be a total loss. A total loss. I don't remember hanging up the phone. I don't remember throwing on my coat over my nightgown or fumbling for my car keys. My body moved on autopilot while my mind was still reeling, refusing to accept the reality. Kingdoms can burn. Vincent's words were a roaring in my ears, louder than the engine of my car as I sped through the deserted streets. I saw the glow in the sky before I was even close. A terrifying, pulsating orange that stained the clouds. As I got nearer, the smell hit me, the acrid, choking smell of burning wood, plaster, and 40 years of my life. The police had blocked off the road a block away, but I parked my car haphazardly and ran, my slippers slapping against the cold pavement. And then I saw it. It was my nightmare made real. The hearth wasn't a building anymore. It was a monster of flame, a raging, roaring beast that clawed at the night sky. Fire poured from the windows where families used to sit, where the afternoon sun used to stream in. The roof I had helped Thomas tar one hot summer 30 years ago was collapsing inward, sending a volcano of sparks and embers into the air. The sign, the beautiful hand-carved sign that read "The Hearth," was a blackened, smoldering wreck. I stood behind the yellow police tape, oblivious to the cold, to the firefighters shouting, to the hiss of water on flame. All I could see was my life being consumed. I saw Thomas and me, young and laughing, painting the walls. I saw my daughter's 5th birthday party at table 4. I saw Maria, my chef, teaching a new line cook how to properly sear a steak. I saw the faces of 1,000 customers, all of their stories, their joys, their sorrows, all of it turning to ash. Every memory, every dream, every drop of sweat was being incinerated before my eyes. A firefight. His face smudged with soot came over to me. "Ma'am, are you the owner?" he asked gently. I could only nod, tears streaming down my face, freezing on my cheeks. "I'm so sorry," he said. "We did everything we could. We got the call late. It looks like it started in the back near the gas lines. The fire marshal is here. From the looks of it, the way it spread so fast, he's almost certain it was deliberately set. This was arson, ma'am." I didn't need him to tell me. As I stared at the inferno that was once my sanctuary, I didn't feel shock or disbelief. I felt a cold, hard certainty that settled in my stomach like a block of ice. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't bad luck. This was Vincent. He had looked me in the eye and promised me this, and he had kept his promise. He hadn't just destroyed a building. He had taken a torch to my heart. The sun rose on a scene of utter devastation. The fierce orange of the fire had given way to the sickly gray of dawn, revealing the true extent of the destruction. What was once the hearth was now a skeletal ruin, a blackened husk of charred beams and collapsed walls, steaming faintly in the cold morning air. The smell of wet soot was overpowering. It was the smell of a funeral. I had been there all night, wrapped in a blanket someone had given me, sitting in the passenger seat of a police car. I couldn't bring myself to leave. Leaving felt like abandoning a dying loved one. When the fire was finally out and the sun was up, a detective, a kind-faced man named Peterson, gently told me they were done for now, but that the area was a crime scene. "We found what we were looking for, Mrs. Thorne," he said, his voice soft. "A gas can tossed in the bushes out back, and the back door was forced open. This was deliberate. Do you have any idea who might do something like this? Any disgruntled employees, any enemies?" I looked at the smoking wreckage, at the ghost of my life, and I said the name that had been echoing in my mind for hours. My brother, Vincent Thorne. Detective Peterson's eyes held mine. He didn't look surprised. He just nodded slowly and wrote the name in his little notebook. "We'll pay Mr. Thorne a visit," he said. The days that followed were a blur of hollow-eyed misery. Sleep wouldn't come. When it did, I was tormented by nightmares of fire and Vincent's sneering face. I'd wake up smelling smoke that wasn't there. My home, usually a place of comfort, felt like a sterile waiting room. The heart of my life had been ripped out and I was just a shell going through the motions. The insurance company was a nightmare of bureaucratic coldness. They sent an adjuster who walked through the rubble with a clipboard, asking me to itemize everything that was lost. How do you put a price on your late husband's hand-carved bar? On the first dollar bill you ever earned, framed behind the counter. On the worn spot on the floor where I stood for 40 years greeting my customers. Every question was a fresh stab of pain. They spoke of depreciation and liability while I spoke of memories and love. We were speaking different languages. They made it clear that because it was arson, the investigation would be long and the payout, if it ever came, was far from guaranteed. One morning, about a week after the fire, I forced myself to go back. I needed to see it in the daylight to try and find something, anything to hold on to. I stepped over the yellow tape, my boots crunching on shattered glass and debris. The place was an open wound. The sky was visible through the collapsed roof. Rain from the night before had mixed with the ash to create a black, sludgy mess on the floor. I made my way carefully toward the back to where my small office had been. The metal filing cabinet had survived, though it was warped and blackened. I pried open a drawer. Inside, the paper files were a solid block of charred carbon, but underneath them I saw it, a small metal recipe box. It was a gift from Thomas on our first anniversary. It was scorched and dented, but it was intact. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, the recipe cards for my mother's pot roast, for Thomas's favorite buttermilk biscuits, for our famous apple pie were singed and water damaged, but they were readable. I sank to my knees in the soot and ash, clutching that box to my chest, and I sobbed. I cried for my husband, for my restaurant, for the life that had been stolen from me in a single night of fire and hate. I felt so utterly alone. At 76, I was supposed to be enjoying my golden years, surrounded by the warmth of my legacy. Instead, I was kneeling in the ruins of it, facing financial ruin and a soul-crushing emptiness. The thought of rebuilding was impossible. Where would I even start? I was too old, too tired, too broken. Vincent hadn't just burned down a building, he had burned down my will to fight. 2 days later, Detective Peterson called. "Mrs. Thorne," he said, his voice calm and steady. I just wanted to let you know that we've arrested your brother. We found his fingerprints on the gas can, and a neighbor's security camera caught his car near the restaurant about 20 minutes before the first call came in. He's confessed to everything." I sat down heavily in my armchair. He confessed. The words should have brought relief, a sense of justice, but they didn't. All I felt was a profound, bottomless sadness. My own brother, my mother's son, the little boy I used to read stories to. He had chosen hate over family, destruction over love. The fire had taken my past, and now the law had taken what little was left of my family. I was well and truly alone. The news of Vincent's arrest settled not as a victory, but as a final heavy stone on my chest. My family, already fractured, was now irrevocably shattered. My brother was in jail, a confessed felon. My restaurant was a pile of ash, and I was adrift in a sea of grief with no land in sight. I spent my days in a thick fog, canceling suppliers, talking to shell-shocked employees, and trying to navigate the labyrinthine insurance claims process. Each task felt like lifting a mountain. It was during this bleak period, about 3 weeks after the fire, that the phone rang again. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered it with the same weary monotone I used for everything now. "Rosemary Thorne, please." The voice was old, familiar, and kind. It took me a moment to place it. "This is she." "Rosemary, it's Daniel Caldwell." Daniel Caldwell, the name was a dispatch from another lifetime. Daniel had been our parents' lawyer, a friend of my father's since they were boys. He was a pillar of quiet integrity, a man whose presence was as comforting as a warm coat on a cold day. I hadn't spoken to him in years, not since he had helped settle Dad's estate. "Daniel," I said, a flicker of warmth cutting through the fog. It's good to hear your voice. I'm sorry, I'm afraid I'm not very good company these days. His voice turned somber. I know, my dear, I read about the hearth in the paper and about Vincent. I am so terribly sorry for what you are going through. He paused, and I could hear the difficulty in his next words. Unfortunately, Rosemary, I'm afraid I have more sad news. My heart, already bruised, seemed to seize. What is it, Daniel? It's your mother, Rosemary. She passed away peacefully in her sleep last night. I closed my eyes. It wasn't a shock, not really. Mom had been fading for a long time, lost in the mists of her dementia. In a way, we had lost her years ago, but the finality of it was still a blow. The last tie to my childhood, to the family we once were, was gone. Another loss, another layer of grief to pile onto the pyre. Tears I didn't know I had left began to slide down my cheeks. Thank you for telling me, Daniel, I whispered. Of course, he said gently. I am the executor of her will. When you feel up to it, we'll need to meet. There are things to discuss. A week later, I found myself sitting in Daniel Caldwell's office. It was an old, respectable place filled with the scent of leather-bound books and brewed tea. It felt safe, a bubble of order in my chaotic world. Daniel, with his kind eyes and steady hands, sat across the mahogany desk from me. He looked older, of course, but his presence was just as reassuring as I remembered. He had already gone over the funeral arrangements, which were simple, just as Mom would have wanted. Now he slid a thick document across the desk. This is your mother's final will and testament, he said. It's quite straightforward. After all debts are paid and a few small bequests to charities are made, the remainder of her estate is to be divided equally between her two children, you and Vincent. I nodded numbly. It was what I expected. The estate wasn't vast, my parents were frugal people, but after selling their small house, Daniel estimated each share would be around $250,000. The thought of Vincent receiving that much money, even in prison, left a bitter taste in my mouth. He would squander it or use it to hire some slick lawyer to appeal his sentence. She loved you both very much, Rosemary, Daniel said softly, as if reading my thoughts. She never saw the bad in him, she only ever saw her little boy. I know, I said, my voice thick. Daniel cleared his throat and put on his reading glasses. There is, however, one other section. A codicil your mother added about 5 years ago after Vincent's last financial disaster, the one involving the fake diamonds. She was lucid then and she was worried. She made me write this in. Let me read it to you. He adjusted the document. It reads, in the event that one of my children is incarcerated under active criminal investigation or is otherwise legally unable to receive their share of the inheritance at the time of my passing, that child's share shall not be held in trust, but shall default in its entirety to the other surviving sibling. I stared at him. The legal language was dense, but the meaning began to slowly dawn on me like the sun rising through a thick fog. Daniel took off his glasses and looked at me, his expression one of profound seriousness. Rosemary, he said slowly, making sure I understood. Vincent is in prison. He has confessed to a felony. He is, by any legal definition, unable to receive his inheritance. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. His share defaults to you. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at the kind, old lawyer across the desk. The room seemed to tilt. $250,000, and then another $250,000, $500,000. It was a sum so vast, so unexpected, that it didn't feel real. It was a lightning bolt from a clear blue sky, a plot twist in a story I thought was already over. In the midst of all my loss, my husband, my restaurant, my brother, my mother, a door had opened. It wasn't a door I had asked for, it wasn't a door I even knew existed. But there it was, a glimmer of impossible, complicated hope in the deepest, darkest pit of my despair. I left Daniel Caldwell's office in a daze, the numbers echoing in my head. $500,000. The amount was staggering, almost comical in its scale and timing. I drove home without really seeing the road, my mind a swirling vortex of shock, grief, and a bewildering new emotion I couldn't yet name. It wasn't happiness. It was more like vertigo. For the next few days, the knowledge of the money sat in my house like an uninvited guest. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I couldn't stop thinking about where half of it came from. It was Vincent's share. It felt wrong. It felt like profiting from my own family's destruction, like taking money that was stained with ash and betrayal. My brother, in his infinite hate, had tried to ruin me, and in doing so, had inadvertently handed me the means to save myself. The irony was so cruel, so twisted, it felt like a joke played by a malicious god. I couldn't eat, I couldn't read. I would sit in my armchair for hours, staring at the wall, wrestling with myself. One part of me, the practical part, saw the money as a lifeline. The insurance company was still dragging its feet, hinting that the payout might be far less than I needed to rebuild. This inheritance was a sure thing. It was a path out of the darkness. It could give me back my life. But another part of me, the part that still remembered playing hide-and-seek with Vincent in our childhood backyard, recoiled from it. Taking his money felt like becoming him, like stooping to his level of mercenary opportunism. It felt like a final, ghoulish victory in a war where everyone had already lost. Would my mother have wanted this? She had put the clause in the will, yes, but could she have ever imagined a scenario this horrific? I imagined her spirit grieving for her lost son, and then I imagined myself using his inheritance. The thought made me feel sick. After a week of this internal torment, I called Daniel. We met for coffee at a small cafe, a neutral ground. I poured out all my confusion, all my guilt, my voice trembling as I spoke. I don't know if I can take it, Daniel, I finished, staring into my cold cup. It feels dirty, it feels like blood money. Daniel listened patiently, his hands wrapped around his own mug. When I was done, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, his expression firm but gentle. Rosemary, he began, we need to be very clear about something. This is not Vincent's money. He never earned it. He never possessed it. It is your mother and father's money. It is the result of their lifetime of hard work and careful saving. They created this legacy. Vincent forfeited his claim to that legacy the moment he chose to douse your life's work in gasoline and strike a match. His words cut through my emotional fog with the clarity of a bell. Your mother put that clause in for a reason, he continued. She saw Vincent's self-destructive nature. She did it to protect her legacy from him, to ensure it wouldn't be squandered on his schemes or legal troubles. In a way, she was protecting you. This isn't you taking something from him. This is you accepting a gift your mother left for you, a gift whose path was cleared by Vincent's own terrible choices. It is not revenge, Rosemary. It is justice. It is the rebalancing of a scale that your brother tried to permanently tip with an act of pure evil. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just a lawyer but a wise and true friend. He was giving me permission to see things differently, to reframe the narrative from one of guilt to one of righteous purpose. That night I had a dream. It was the first peaceful dream I'd had since the fire. In the dream, I was standing in the kitchen of the old hearth, but it was pristine, clean, and filled with a beautiful, warm light. My husband Thomas was there. He wasn't saying anything. He was just standing by the stove, smiling at me. It was the smile he always gave me when I was wrestling with a difficult decision, the one that said, "You know what to do. Be strong." He reached out and gently touched the small metal recipe box that I now kept on my nightstand. Then he faded away. I woke up the next morning and the war inside me was over. The guilt had receded, replaced by a calm, quiet, and powerful resolve. Daniel was right. Thomas was right. This wasn't about Vincent anymore. This was about me. It was about my parents' legacy, my husband's memory, and my 40 years of hard work. Vincent had tried to write the ending to my story. He had tried to end it with fire and ash. But my mother, with her foresight, and Thomas, with his quiet faith in me, had just handed me a new pen. I picked up the phone and called Daniel Caldwell. "Daniel," I said, my voice clear and steady for the first time in months. "It's Rosemary. I've made my decision. I'm accepting the inheritance, and I'm going to rebuild." The decision, once made, was like a dam breaking. A flood of energy I thought I had lost forever surged through me. The grief and lethargy were washed away, replaced by a singular, driving purpose. I wasn't just going to rebuild the hearth, I was going to resurrect it. The first thing I did was fire the condescending insurance adjuster and hire a fierce public adjuster who fought for me like a bulldog. With Daniel's legal help and the clear evidence of arson, the insurance company finally agreed to a settlement. It wasn't everything, but combined with my parents' legacy, it was more than enough. I had the funds. Now I needed a vision. I didn't want to just replicate the old restaurant. That felt like trying to paste a new photograph over a treasured, faded one. The old hearth was gone, and with it, a part of my life. The new hearth had to be something different. It had to be a testament not to what was lost, but to what had endured. It had to be a symbol of resilience. I hired a young, brilliant architect, a woman named Clara, who understood immediately what I wanted. She listened for hours as I told her stories about Thomas, about the regulars, about the feeling I wanted to create. We designed a space that was filled with light, with big windows that looked out onto a newly planted garden. We kept the warmth of the old place, the oak tables, the comfortable booths, but we made it bigger, more open, with a state-of-the-art kitchen that would have made Maria weep with joy. We were building the hearth, too. The work became my life. I was at the construction site every day, wearing a hard hat and a smile. The sounds of hammers and saws were the most beautiful music I had ever heard. It was the sound of creation, the sound of life coming back. My old staff, who had been so devastated, started coming by, first one then another. They'd bring coffee and donuts, offer to help, their faces full of hope. I promised them their jobs were waiting for them. We were a family, and we were putting our home back together. About 6 months into the rebuild, a letter arrived. It was from the state prison. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was from Vincent. It was a rambling, pathetic, self-pitying tirade. He blamed me for his incarceration. He claimed if I had just given him the 50%, none of this would have happened. He accused me of stealing our mother's money, calling me a ghoul and a thief. There was not a single word of remorse for what he had done, only blame. I read the letter once, then I walked to the fireplace in my living room. I struck a match and dropped the letter into the flames. As I watched his hateful words turn to ash, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound sense of pity for a man so consumed by his own bitterness that he couldn't see the world in any other way. He was in a prison of his own making, far more confining than the one of concrete and steel. I was free. The grand reopening was set for a year to the day after the fire. It felt right to reclaim that date, to turn a day of destruction into a day of rebirth. The last 2 weeks were a flurry of activity: stocking the kitchen, training new staff, polishing every glass until it shone. The night of the opening, my heart was pounding. I stood at the door wearing a new dress, clutching Thomas's recipe box. The place was beautiful. It was better than I had ever imagined. The garden outside was lit with fairy lights, the tables were set, and the air smelled of fresh bread and roasting chicken. It was the scent of home. My grandchildren were there, my daughter and her husband. My loyal employees stood by my side, their faces beaming. Daniel Caldwell was at a corner table, raising a glass to me. The mayor came. The entire town, it seemed, had turned out. When I opened the doors, a cheer went up. People flooded in. Their faces filled with wonder and happiness. They marveled at the new space but commented on how it still felt like the hearth. I walked through the crowded room, accepting hugs and congratulations, my heart so full I thought it might burst. I found myself at my new office, a small, bright room at the back. On the wall, I had hung a single framed photo. It was of me and Thomas, taken the day we first bought the old diner, our arms around each other, grinning foolishly at the camera, full of dreams. I looked at his smiling face and whispered, "We did it, my love, we did it." Standing there, listening to the roar of happy voices, the clatter of plates, and the sizzle from the kitchen, I felt a sense of peace that I thought I would never feel again. Vincent had thrown everything he had at me. He had used fire and hate to try and erase me, but he had failed. From the ashes of his betrayal, I had risen. I had taken the worst moment of my life and turned it into my greatest triumph. My legacy was not just intact. It was stronger, brighter, and more beautiful than ever before. In the end, what my brother never understood is that a legacy isn't something you can own or demand. It isn't bricks and mortar that can be burned down or money that can be inherited. A true legacy is built from love, forged in resilience, and measured by the lives you touch. He tried to destroy my past, but in doing so, he gave me a future I never could have imagined. I learned that even in the deepest darkness there can be a sliver of light, and that sometimes the most painful endings are just the beginning of a better story.